Morning, everybody. Afternoon. Happy Friday. Hope you had a great week so far. This would be a good, thoughtful experience towards the end of your week. Make sure that we are all set and live. So looking good on YouTube. A bit. All right. So again, hi and welcome everybody. Today we'll be talking about safe flow with JIRA. There have been multiple asks about this. I'm really curious about what are the questions that you have? What are you looking to hear about? What have been your challenges trying to figure out flow and leverage flow more effectively at scale using safe or other scaling approaches with JIRA? I mean, I don't really consider myself a JIRA expert when I go into organizations and help them to try and establish or improve flow. Uh, I leverage JIRA. I've used JIRA the first time back in, I don't know, 2004 or 5, before I even, knew Agile and really understood JIRA well at that time. And over the years, of course, I encountered JIRA in many cases in my work with clients, but it's always been something that, can support the work that I do with coaching for the organization. It's not the first thing. But last year, as part of working with an IT organization that was and still is trying to leverage agile and safe techniques and principles in order to improve its ability to deliver, improve its time to market, improve internal customer satisfaction by the business and other IT functions. They're using JIRA, and I've done more work than I've done in the years before around how to actually leverage JIRA well, how to set up JIRA for success with safe, and how to look at flow metrics as the right metrics to manage in order to drive the right behaviors. And today I'm going to talk a bit about some of the experiences around that. So with that preamble in mind, one of the things that we need to remember in the safe world is that safe is a set of flow systems, or I like at least to look at safe as a set of flow systems at multiple levels of the organization. Klaus Leopold might call those Kanban flight levels. And this is very similar to the pattern that I've used to help organizations with Kanban for many years, even before SAFE had those different Kanban systems. Essentially, if you have a team should have a team level Kanban that serves as that team level flow system. If you have a team of teams that work together in Agile Release Train and ART, there's a flow system to pay attention to at that level as well. And the flow there is of features and feature level enablers. If you have teams of those arts working together, you might have solution train Kanban. And if you are looking at portfolio level, you will have a flow system of the biggest initiative that this portfolio wants to invest in or learn about, those epics, and the portfolio Kanban is a tool at that level. The same flow principles of visualizing the flow, limiting the amount of work in process, starting to pay attention to the flow properties of these systems, recognizing bottlenecks, recognizing waste, starting to pay attention to other aspects, and working to accelerate flow. All of these are applicable at all of these levels. And when you're implementing or when you're managing the flow using a tool like JIRA, and the similar situation is there regardless of the tool that you use, whether it's ADO, JIRA Line, or any other tool, you basically need to both set up your Kanban boards at the right levels, make sure that those Kanban boards are set such that the flow metrics would map well to these levels, and start to collect and look at these flow metrics in the different safe events, and by the different people, whether it's safe or not, different people at different the different flight levels or different levels of these flow systems, look at the metrics at the right level for the right purposes. So maybe just to recap, what do we mean by flow metrics? And I've had a previous live stream around the mapping of flow metrics between safe and Mick Kirsten's flow and professional Scrum with Kanban flow metrics. In this case, I'm going to talk about SAFE's flow metrics. And if we look at the Kanban board, essentially, you can see all of the flow metrics, or most of the flow metrics here on the Kanban board. You can see flow time, obviously the time between, you know, a point that a card flows through a certain state on the board all the way to another state on the board, not necessarily the entire board, but there might be a challenge of how do you actually measure that flow time if you're interested in such a subsection. In the case of JIRA, the way we might do that, or the way I do that, is create multiple Kanban boards. Each Kanban board in JIRA is basically a view on the same data set, the same filter or different filters or views of the actual issued data. And by setting up different views through different Kanban boards, you can actually look at subsections of the flow. That's one of the key concepts of how to leverage flow metrics effectively with JIRA. So for example, if we are interested in the full flow, we'll use a Kanban board that looks at the full thing. If we're interested just at execution flow time, let's say for features, we might set a board that doesn't have these states, doesn't have the analyzing ready PI backlog, doesn't maybe have ready for release, and transition. And if we then do a report of cycle time on that subsection of the board, we'll get the flow time that we're interested in. There are some ways to also filter out certain items, certain states, and swimming lanes in JIRA, in the JIRA report itself. Sometimes you can use that. Sometimes you need a separate board. So you can play around with that. The WIP, of course, is the amount of items in a certain area. The main way we measure that is using cumulative flow diagrams. And one of the advantages in most cumulative flow diagrams, including in JIRA, is that you can actually toggle certain states on and off and then see the amount of items over time just in the states that you're interested in. So you don't need a separate board just to understand the WIP in subsections of the board. Throughput, kind of similar to velocity, but again, without the story points. But the way to actually see that is using the velocity chart, just changing the unit for the y-axis. I'll show you a bit about that. Flow distribution is actually one of the toughest ones to see in JIRA, and it requires a separate plugin. Maybe I'll talk about that in a follow-up session. But essentially, flow distribution is not all of the cards are the same. There are cards of different types. capacity allocation provides us with some sort of guardrail of how do we want to plan the distribution of cards in between the different types. For example, feature, enabler, technical debt, work for a specific client, work for a specific horizon. Flow distribution actually shows us what did we actually deliver from each one of these categories. And in order to see that, we need a certain type of report that I found a bit hard to extract with JIRA itself. So there's plugins like timing state plugins that can actually be customized to provide these reports in a reasonable fashion. Again, I might show that the next time. So that's very high level what we're trying to do here. While doing that work, what I do with organizations is we start with if they're implementing SAFe, we start with the SAFe Kanban templates at the different levels, but we typically add some stuff. So if I look, for example, at the art Kanban, some things that I typically add is a separation, a different state of PI backlog in between ready and implementing, which indicates that we pulled something into the PI, but we haven't started it yet. That's really important, for example, for a metric of flow efficiency. Flow efficiency needs to know when items are actually in flight and when items are waiting, are delayed in the queues. So each one of your queues, for example, PI backlog, should be highlighted. And it will be actually interesting to see how much time do features spend in that queue. If we start to think about flow and what does it mean to work in PIs and do PI planning from a flow perspective, you might start to see some interesting patterns, like our features are spending many weeks in PI planning because we plan them for the PI and then they wait. It's kind of natural if you're doing classic PI planning. Maybe that's good enough for you. Maybe it will actually drive you to have some different perspectives about how do you look at PI planning? Do you pull features in during the PI? Do you just plan half of the key concept critical chain of the PI during PI planning? It will start to bring you some interesting perspectives about the way you're running the PI, like using Kanban at the team level, broad teams or brings teams, very interesting perspectives about sprint planning. Other queues that I typically add would be ready for some activities like integration and testing or release and transition. Every time in your process there is a queue, you should make sure that your Kanban board should reflect that so that the flow metrics would really make sense. So that's one of the things that you really want to pay attention to. Again, you need to have in JIRA an epic level Kanban board that reflects your features, your SAFe features. You don't want to track stories on that board. You need to use this to map your reality. Each one of these boards would be for a specific art, for a specific product within the art. You can create boards that aggregate information from multiple arts in the portfolio if you're interested, and that would be especially useful if you have similarity across those states. But it doesn't mean that you need to have the same states for all of your arts. You just need to agree on some lowest common denominator that you will know how to map each one of your art Kanban boards into that wider perspective. So at the portfolio level, looking at an art Kanban for features from across the different arts in the portfolio is a view that is very interesting to people, and looking at flow metrics at that level and distinguishing, what interesting commonalities can we see, what interesting differences can we see, can be a useful conversation. Some of the other things that usually come up is, should we use should we use Scrum boards in JIRA? Should we use Kanban boards in JIRA? And the answer that I typically end up with is it probably makes sense to use both. So teams that are using SAFe typically use both Scrum and Kanban. And in JIRA, they would both use the Scrum view that enables them to actually manage their sprints and plan them out, plan the overall backlog, and pull items into the different sprints. But the problem if you're using the Scrum board is that the Scrum board only shows you items from the active sprint on your board. And if you're using that, you will not be able to see items that are still in refinement. Items that you're working towards the next sprint on. That's at least what I've seen. So one of the things that I commonly do is for each team, they both have the Scrum board that they mainly use for the backlog view. But they also have a Kanban board that looks end-to-end, that manages their end-to-end view that includes everything from every sprint, which is the way I typically like to look at the Kanban board. I might want to know which items are associated with which sprint, but I also want to see work that's from the previous sprint that's going downstream and work that relates to upcoming potential sprints that is still being refined and the team is considering. Especially if you're using something like SAFe, what you will see if you do this is, items that will be assigned to a sprint. Think about PI planning. Once you finish PI planning, items will be assigned to a certain upcoming sprint in the PI. But you haven't refined those items yet, and not all of the items, will be there already. There's a process of, taking items and refining them that's kind of orthogonal to the fact that these items are slotted out to potential draft sprint in PI planning already. So the Kanban board that I use, if we want to go back to that board, will basically allow me to manage this process of taking items that are still raw and need to be refined so that they can actually be ready for iteration backlog, and do that while I already know that this is an item that relates to a certain sprint in the PI. Now, again, not all of the stories for the entire PI will be there on the board. Those might be just, starter stories that are very big and would need to be sliced smaller for working throughout for really working on them in iterations. PI planning is not about figuring out all of the detailed stories. It's not a replacement for iteration planning. And the purpose is not to create iteration backlogs for all of the iterations in the PI. That's a separate conversation that we can continue and might continue some other time. But that's more or less what happens at that level. Once you get going and have this basic structure and start to work and can start to collect flow metrics and use them. Now, one of the things that I posted last year, which created very interesting, let's call it that, conversations on LinkedIn, was how to use the lean flow metrics in art events. This is actually based on something we use in professional Scrum with Kanban, for how to actually use the different flow metrics in the different team level events. All I did here was kind of adjust it a bit for the safe language, but it's basically a core part or core deliverable out of the professional Scrum with Kanban. But here I use that and scale that to the art level. And this provides us with both, which metrics do we want to look at, but also at which event do we use them to what capacity. So there's a lot to unpack here. I won't get to all of this today, but one thing I did want to focus on is a missing event or potential in SAFe, which is basically where do we have an opportunity to really reflect on our flow on an ongoing basis. Now, you could do that as part of the Inspect and Adapt workshop at the end of the PI, but I don't think that's frequent enough from my experience, especially in teams that are in arts that are trying to really work on accelerating flow. It's not really the focus of the PI system demo or the system demo. It's not really the operational focus of the art sync, although you could say we do that there, but my experience is you don't really get to that level of conversation there. So what I've been thinking and practicing, with this client is flow review. Flow review is inspired by the Kanban operations review, which was mainly championed by David Anderson. And even before, Kanban, in his book Agile Management, he talks about operations review. By the way, this is a book I really like and recommend. What he wrote about the monthly operations review is that it's the opportunity to review our operation from a quantitative perspective, driving improvement, creating a culture of openness and trust, share a common understanding of the issues that are confronting us, and debate the opportunity for improvements. It's a learning opportunity. If you want to read through it, the article is available in the web archive. It's not on, this site anymore, but the book is still available, and again, highly recommended. What we've done with this, we've created the flow review, where we basically use flow metrics to drive flow and agility mindset. We use the SAFe flow metrics because it's a SAFe organization that is leveraging the SAFe language, which is our opportunity to focus on making value flow. It's not the system demo, which is mainly focused on inspecting and adapting the content. It's not the INA workshop that's not frequent enough. And it's not the art sync. Bottom line, we want to add this opportunity that really focuses on flow. And the point here is to get the data that flow metrics provide us, turn it into information, and turn that information, that signal, into action. Something we can actually take and do something about. There's preparation. And essentially what happens in the flow review is each one of the groups, let's say we're running it at the portfolio level or at an art level, each one of the teams or each one of the arts, we're using it for a small portfolio with a couple of arts. Each one of the arts comes prepared to this session after, reflecting on their flow metrics. What do they learn from them? Asking themselves some of these key questions, trying to look for patterns, trying to look for anomalies, trying to follow up on improvement actions or experiments or activities that they've decided to take the last time around. They come, they present their thinking, they drive conversation, they might get questions or comments or ideas from the other groups. And the idea is to enable action. The purpose is not to use this to manage the daily activity, that we have other, ways to do that. It's of course not, to blame. It's an open environment. We've had great conversations where the SVP in charge of this group would really, ask the teams to slow down, tell him, how do they read the data? What do they understand from this? It's a real opportunity to take a step back and understand how the work flows. And once you start to understand how the work flows, where are the cues, what's going on, you start to see some patterns, and this can really drive some interesting conversations around how to improve. It's really helped us get from conversations around we need to learn how to plan and focus, on iteration planning and PI planning and forecasting. Um, those are all important conversations, but we don't get enough time to think about flow and how the work is flowing. So these are conversations that you can start in art syncs and team syncs and portfolio syncs, but you can dive much deeper if you actually dedicate proper time to this. So this has been a great success that we've brought from other Kanban engagements in the past when I've used operations review. So this is something I really wanted to share. There might be some more stuff to do a follow-up conversation on. I'm gonna probably share. I'm thinking I'm gonna share this mural so people that want to review it and ask questions and comments can do that. And if there are interesting comments, I might do a follow-up. There's a question from Robert. Let me see if I can feature that question over here for us. So could time in status measurements be a good alternative to additional Kanban boards? My thinking is no. It's useful to see how much time items spent in it. It depends, I guess. One of the reasons to create separate Kanban views, they don't have to be. So go back to that, the previous topic. Basically, what Robert is asking is back to this question over here of how do we calculate the execution flow time? If our board looks all across, what I said earlier is that one technique that I'm using for that is just create another Kanban view with just the states I'm interested in and use the cycle time chart on that Kanban board. What Robert is wondering is whether having a report that shows me time that items spent in each one of these statuses, whether I could use that report to calculate the flow time and get rid of that additional Kanban board. Maybe if all I want is that data. The gut is in the details, though. Will I be able to get a good cycle time control chart based on that information? How hard would it be to actually create that and manage it? And I find that creating that additional view and being able to see the metrics on that view, while remembering that I don't really need to manage that Kanban board day to day. The team has one Kanban board that they use end to end. I just have this additional Kanban board as a way to look at flow metrics. I find that to work better in my experience, but if you have a good experience with time in status plugins that can do that for you, go ahead. What I find is that these time in status plugins aren't that easy to work with, and even powerful plugins like Actionable Agile are not as integrated into this environment for actually calculating the metrics and showing them as they would have liked. There are some gaps, even when using the most powerful plugins like Actionable Agile, when trying to calculate these sort of things on an ongoing basis and work with them in an integrated fashion. So I hope this was useful. If you want me to schedule another live stream to follow up on this, let me know. We'll finish on time today, as I have to do some other work before I head out for the weekend. Looking forward to your feedback and further conversation. Happy Friday. Enjoy your weekend.